Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase, the podcast that helps you succeed in your business, life, and career. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group, and with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
I'm doing fantastic. How about you, Eric?
I am doing just fine. It has been a very hectic few weeks, getting a lot done. And one of the things that's made it so hectic is an ongoing situation that seems to keep popping up. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because I have had a number of folks come to me with complaints that they are suffering from imposter syndrome.
That sounds very, very interesting to me. I mean, you have a lot more people coming to you than coming to me, but when you said that to me, I was saying, okay, I don't know if I've heard of this before or not, but it sounds very, very interesting. And to me, my initial thought was it's just another form of mind games that we play with ourselves. So I'm very, very interested in talking about this. I've
It
done my research again, but it's very, very interesting. And obviously, it's something that can be worked on yourself, but obviously with the help of others, there's a lot of things out there that can help you. But most importantly, it's you know, taking a look at things from a positive perspective as opposed to always thinking about what's wrong.
it is. And for those of our listeners who have not heard of imposter syndrome, essentially what it is that even just momentarily, you feel like you are not qualified to do what you are doing or do what you're attempting. It is at its core self doubt. Now, for some people, this can be an almost constant thing, holding them back, where people will not even try something new because they don't believe they have the skills to do it. For some people, it shows up absolutely unexpected and only for a moment and then goes away. And it is something that we're almost trained to do because all our lives we're told, "Oh, don't do that. You'll be disappointed. Oh, but what if you fail?" And over time that becomes ingrained in us, to the point that when we are doing something differently or doing something new, we expect that we are not capable of doing this. And in fact, I had a momentary attack of imposter syndrome. This is actually going back a few years. I actually found it funny when it happened. I was in a board meeting for one of the nonprofits that I serve on. And at this point, nonprofits were very new to me. I'd only been on the board for maybe a few months. And I'm in this board meeting and they ask, what I think. And I start talking. Now I'm talking about things from a marketing and communications standpoint, which is my expertise. But when a nonprofit is concerned, there are differences and there are, things that have to be adjusted. Well, I'm talking and I'm giving them the benefit of my expertise, and they're listening and they're agreeing. Oh, yes, and we can do this and this. And the momentary thought popped into my head, oh my God, they actually think I know what I'm talking about. And it happens because we're dealing with new situations. Well, the fact of the matter is, every new situation is just building on previous situations and previous experiences. You're bringing everything you've done to the table. So there are certain things you can do when imposter syndrome hits to help you get past it. And the first thing we need to do is acknowledge your achievements. No matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, you've had achievements in the past. Nobody gets to where they are without achieving something. So you have to celebrate those achievements. And we've talked about that before in helping to build a positive mindset. But when dealing with imposter syndrome, it's very important because this actually shows you what you are capable of, and you're giving yourself concrete examples of what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I always talk about when I'm talking about developing a positive mindset, and I brought this up before, is a tool called the victory log. And what a victory log is just taking out a sheet of paper and writing down all the accomplishments and every great thing that's happened to you in your whole life, starting from day one through school, through your workplace, everything else that you've had. And once you start writing these things down, you're going to see that there's a whole lot of worth that you have and that you've done. It's so important to celebrate your accomplishments. Um, I went to Google this, and the first thing that came up for the first time ever was AI overview. So here I have
Oh,
artificial intelligence that's talking to me about this. But celebrating your accomplishments was actually right on the list at number three. The first one is just acknowledging your feelings. And this is where, when you're having problems with anything else, recognize that it's normal to feel like you're not okay with yourself. Everybody has an inferiority complex one way or another, no matter how good they are, because
yep.
somehow they don't think that they're worthy of praise. And it's so important to acknowledge that you are. And along those lines is reframing your thoughts, taking control of this internal narrative and actually challenge that negative self-talk. Say, is this really true? Look at that list of accomplishments that you have. I mean, this is a great way to start, is to just turn around all the negativity and say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to write down the positive stuff and concentrate on that. And then get this into your habits so that you can just turn that on at any point in time when you're down. Because the bottom line is, regardless of what we think of ourselves, we all came from good. We all came from loving kindness. We are all loved unconditionally. And that's just the way it is, whether we believe it or not. So go out there and give yourselves a high five and just get on with it. This is a lot easier said than done, but all we're talking about here is awareness of this imposter syndrome problem.
So true. And you hit on something as you were talking that goes even past imposter syndrome. And it's the fact that this happens to everybody. Everyone has a moment of self doubt. Well, it's not just with imposter syndrome. I was having a conversation with someone who gets very anxious every Monday morning. Mondays just fill her with dread. And I said to her, well, that's not uncommon. And in fact, there is a statistic that shows that most people that suffer from insomnia suffer from it on Sunday night because of Monday morning anxiety. The trick is to not let it control you, to just acknowledge your feeling and move forward. But when I told her that statistic, she was like, really? I thought it was just me. That is something that we have to understand, that no matter what we're going through, no matter how terrible it may seem, no matter how daunting it may seem, others are going through it too. We are virtually never alone in what we are feeling. This trick is, though, to say, yes, I am feeling this, but then not let it affect your decisions, not let it affect your actions. Just accept that you have the emotion and then move past it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the phrases that I caught, which is so true, is there is no single cause of imposter syndrome. However, and listen to this because this describes life itself. Culture, environment are factors, with research pointing to family dynamics and the roles of people that they learn early in life. In other words, how you were brought up, there could be a lot of different things that come back to you, especially from childhood and everything else, that all of a sudden pop up in your mind. And it could be a bad experience or whatever. You could have had some person that basically insulted you in first grade, and you're thinking about that for the rest of your life, and you're coming up, and all of a sudden that kind of thing pops up. I'm 70 and I
Yep.
still have that kind of stuff. And it's crazy thing. So I mean, if you acknowledge that Just acknowledge your feelings again and just realize that there's no single cause. It's a culmination of everything. And with us being bombarded these days by the media, all of the online stuff and whatever, 24/7 availability, most of which points towards the negativity and problems and so on and so forth. It's your choice to turn that off or at least put it in its place. Use perspective that that's not the way things really are and that you are in charge and you can take charge of yourself at any point in time. But obviously, if you're going to pay attention, just let yourself wallow in that and what I call the land of saneville, which is just letting this outside world that you have no control over control you. That's what the problem is. But at any point in time, you have a choice to change that, even if it's just for the present moment. And that's when it starts.
All right. You don't have to pay attention to the negativity. There is a prayer that I believe it's the cornerstone of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of grant me the strength to change what I can, the patience to deal with what I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yep. And the key is knowing the difference.
Yes. If you can't change it, don't stress about it. If you're having an emotional reaction to something, simply acknowledge it's your emotions. But remember that your emotions, especially when it's a knee jerk reaction, are not necessarily accurate. And we have to understand that there are loads of things that affect us. I was talking to someone from Europe not too long ago, and we were discussing the difference in being brought up in England and being brought up in the United States. And one of the key differences was in America, we're always told over and over again, there's nothing you can't do. You can grow up to be president. Yeah, we all heard that as kids. Anyone can grow up to be president. In England, they don't do that. In England, they train them to limit what they want, to aim lower. And I brought up there was an interesting conversation years ago on the Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson, where Craig Ferguson and Stephen Fry were having a conversation. And if there's listeners out there that don't know who these folks are, they're both actors. Craig Ferguson's originally from Scotland. He's now an American citizen. Stephen Fry is a British actor, and they were friends for years. But in this conversation, they were discussing why there was such difference between British culture and American culture. And Stephen Fry postulated that the difference is the people that truly believed that they could obtain something better left Europe and came to America. And the people that decided, oh, what we have is good enough, stayed in Europe. And that cultural difference inundates both countries. Well, now think about growing up this way. Even if you're here in America, if your parents are always saying, well, no, we can't afford that. You can't have that now. You can't do that now. Hearing that over and over again imprints itself on you. Even years and years later, it still has an impact and can surface as imposter syndrome. Now, Chip mentioned the victory journal. Go back as far as you can, write down all your accomplishments. Even simpler than that, start with today. What did you do today that you are proud of? And keep track of that, because that list of accomplishments will help build you up so that you can overcome imposter syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big part of that, put that in your gratitude journal too. I've talked about gratitude
Yes.
journal a whole lot, and gratitude is not just appreciating everything and everybody around you. It starts with appreciating that person in the mirror because those are your feelings that are coming out. And the bottom line is, if somebody else has reacted positively to you or somebody has complimented you for an accomplishment and so on and so forth, it came from you. It started with you. And don't feel aw shucks and whatever. Write that down and just say, hey, yeah, that is me. And not from an ego standpoint, but from right from your heart, because that's where we all came from. And that's what we're all doing. We're all contributing to other people's lives far more than we could have ever imagined. I mean, my journey, as a lot of you folks know, right now I call myself the Happiness and Success GPS, but I've been through a whole lot, from basically just accounting to running my father's business to teaching networking to doing this and that, whatever. And finally, I went into personal development, which I had been listening to for a long, long time. But I started incorporating that into everything that I do, saying, oh, yeah, this is the source of everything. It's got to come from your heart, and realizing that that person in the mirror is so, so important. And you got to be your best self and think of yourself as your best self to give your best to the world. And that allows me to go out and talk about all these different things. If I all of a sudden showed up at a networking meeting 20 years ago and started talking about the kindness platform when everybody else was talking about competition, they probably would have thrown me out of the room or just laughed at me uncontrollably. But now people know that that's what I'm all about. And when I walk into a room and when I meet people, this has become who I am. And it's in everybody else too. It's really our source. And you can pull it out of yourself just by putting it into practice. But it all starts with realizing that it's there in the first place and working on it.
And that's so true. We all have potential within us that we don't really appreciate. And others may see it in us and appreciate it more. But people have the tendency to go, oh, well, someone else can do that, but not me. I'm not capable of that. And one of the things you can do on an active basis to avoid imposter syndrome, and we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, is to be a lifelong learner. One of the roots, and again, there are so many, but one of the roots of imposter syndrome is the mistaken belief that you need to know everything to be successful. Well, I mean, that's not even close to true. Nobody knows everything. But realizing that learning is an ongoing process will relieve some of that pressure, because you may not know everything, but you're learning more and more. And you learn more today than you did yesterday. And as a lifelong learner, you start to realize that, hey, I may not know everything, but I know where I can find it out. And I know if I need a fact, if I need a new skill, I can find it, I can learn it. So lifelong learning is crucial to success in general. But for imposter syndrome, it is a fantastic vaccine against it, because the more you're learning, the more you realize you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And learning is not taking a test and getting good grades or bad
No.
grades. Because if you have good grades or bad grades and you're looking at that as a measurement, it's not what, it's what you do with it. It's how you put it into action. And it's so, so important to just realize that. I mean, obviously, we have ways of measuring ourselves, which we as human beings created, and it's good in a lot of ways. But if we make that number one and we concentrate on the bad side of things, that's the wrong way to go. One of the best things that you can do if you want to work on yourself is to also make a conscious effort to go out and look for and acknowledge the goodness in everybody else that you meet instead of the faults that they have, because we all have those too. But again, these are measurements that we place upon ourselves and on others. And if we're placing them on others, it's only to cover our own insecurities or our own imposter system, if that's what we want to call it. But it's so, so important. If you're out there just looking for and acknowledging the good in other people, complimenting them, and so on and so forth, the bottom line is people will be attracted to you. They're going to want to talk with you. They're going to want to hang out with you, and so on and so forth. And it's going to spread through them too. It's so, so important to do that. So one of the things that you should do in your gratitude journal every day is write down how that's happened with other people in your lives. And if they're doing that to you, great. And if you start doing it to them, write it down. It's so, so important to go back and read it too. Make sure that you're not just writing this thing down as an exercise, but go back and take a look at that because that is the history. That is, if you want to talk about a test or writing things, that's what it's all about. That's you.
Yes, and when you're looking for goodness, when you're looking at learning, when you're looking at all of these things, it's very important not to fall into traps about how you're measuring success, education, learning. Like you just said, it's not about taking the test. You know, there's an old saying, you can't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. The most successful fish can't climb trees, but that's not a metric that's relevant to them. Mark Twain once said, I have never let my education get in the way of my learning. And it's so true because we've come to believe that whatever we get out of our education system is what counts as learning. And in fact, there are schools and there are entire states that say, oh, we have a fantastic education system because all they're doing is counting the number of people they push through it rather than what these folks actually learned. You know, Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, all of these folks dropped out of college. They never stopped learning. They just stopped taking classes. And there's a big difference between learning and taking a class. How many times did you sit through a class in junior high school, daydreaming, staring out the window, and not really absorbing what was being said? Well, you got the education, but you didn't learn anything. So you have to be very careful about how you judge what learning is, what goodness is, what success is. And don't put somebody else's definition on it. You have to determine what's right for you. And you have the ability to do it. Even if you're depressed, even when you feel like, no, I'm not good enough, assume that you are always at the starting line. You may not feel good enough right now, but what can you do about that? It's not about if you can change or if you can overcome. It's how you can overcome. I very often say, stop asking, can you do it? And start asking how you can do it. And that's what we're talking about is how you can get past the imposter syndrome and convince yourself of your own self-worth. And it's keep learning, keep focusing on what you've already achieved, and keep realizing that the only thing holding you back is you.
Yep. And understand again, it's just present moment because life is always going to be ups and downs. And it's just an awareness that you have to have. And if you can program your mind to look at the positive side of things first, again, event plus response equals outcome. And if you can pause and use positivity and the things that you've done positive between that and how you respond, that's the key to it. It's present moment, realizing you're going to have your down times too, even on Sunday nights going into Monday. It's going to happen. But it's if you can start programming yourself to looking at the bright side of life, think of the Monty Python song, always look at the bright side of life. It's a great thing to do. And obviously, if you put these little things together that you can go back to, write down a couple of phrases that are in front of you all the time. So if they're just programmed in your mind automatically, instead of, oh man, it's something else happened to me.
Yes, emotions are programmed, and that's something we have to realize. And we have been being programmed all our lives by everything we've been told, everything we've read, everything we've done. But there's even more to it than that. Because if you're reacting to something emotionally, not only have your emotions been programmed by events and your own history, but they're also programmed by your genes. They're also programmed by what you eat, because emotions are simply chemical reactions in your body. So there are all of these things that have nothing to do with what's upsetting you that are actually creating those emotions. And that's why we have to learn to accept the emotions for what they are. It's what you're feeling at the moment, rather than this all knowing, controlling force. You can overcome your emotions if you start to understand them. And when you realize that, and we've said this a lot, fear is false evidence appearing real. Well, your emotions are the same way. They're not necessarily related to what's going on at the moment. So look at what's happening in your life. Take that step back and figure out how you're going to respond. And say, yes, I feel bad about this. Or better still, hey, this makes me feel great. But then move on realistically. Go, yes, I feel nervous about this because I've never done it. But think about all of the things that you've done that you had never done before. If we never did anything new, we would all still be lying around waiting to be fed by somebody else, because we wouldn't have taken our first steps to walk. We wouldn't have tried new foods. We wouldn't have gone out and done all of the things we enjoy, because we never would have taken the chance to try them. And that's what you really have to do, is realize that you have tried more things than you realize, and that the most successful people in the world fail the most often. That's what makes them successful, because they don't stop trying. All right, we are coming up on the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for today?
Getting back to the present moment. If you are worrying or kicking yourself in the butt about what's happened in the past, you are giving control of yourself, this present moment, to the past. If you are worrying about what's going to happen in the next moment or in the future, you are giving up control of yourself to that. Get back to the present moment. I always talk about my 4 Ps: purpose, passion, positivity, and a plan. Find your true self, find what you're all about. And the next time you are looking for the negatives of things, just think of the words, why not? Go for a week and change all of your yes buts, which are all of your excuses for not accomplishing things, all of the measurements that your negative self has, and turn it into the positive things that you can do by saying yes and. Change yes but to yes and. Say why not. These are mantras that you can use, and just go to the mirror every single morning, as I've said before, smile at yourself and give yourself a high five, because the coolest person in the world is looking right back at you. Go get them.
Exactly. You have to realize that you have done so much. We have these self doubts, but they're not controlling. And something that you should do routinely, even when you don't look back at your accomplishments, if you're feeling that you're an imposter or you're feeling anxious about something, think about the last time you felt imposter syndrome. Think about the last time you felt anxious. What were you anxious about? What was it that you were doing that you felt imposter syndrome? Guess what? You're past it. You made it, and nothing terrible happened to you. Because right now is the future that you were so anxious about yesterday. So realize that your anxieties don't control you, that they're not based in reality, and that you can accomplish more than you ever imagined as long as you don't stop trying. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.